Uh-oh.
All right, welcome back, and we're continuing with the build on the amp here. As always, brought to you by Three Monkeys Solderless, right? So we've got RCA kits now too, and then the best, obviously, audio and DC kits for your pedal boards. But the RCAs are cool for if you're doing a car audio install, right? Because they come in big lengths. We've got a high dynamic range cable, which is double shielded for low noise, and that cable actually works with the audio stuff too. So check us out at 3monkeyssolderless.com. So all right, so where did we leave off last time? We had all the parts mounted on top of the chassis, and now we start the wiring, right? So the first thing I like to do is just get these sockets some of the wiring done on the sockets, some of the base wiring. Reason being is you're going to have a lot of other components here in another minute. When you put the back panel on, you're going to end up with, jacks here, a pot here, fuse holders, IEC connectors. So then it makes it difficult to really work in there. So I like to do now to get a lot of this wiring for the sockets out of the way. So I'll just give you some quick stuff that we're going to do. Right, so first I'd like to install the cathode resistor, I'll call it, as it's coming off the cathodes of the power tubes. And it's a 1 ohm, 1 watt, 1% Dale metal film resistor. And I must have bought about 10 million of these back in 2002 or 3 or 1 or wherever it was, I don't know. So I'm still using them, and they're just fantastic. They're very accurate. And so they're good for measuring your bias, right, for biasing the amp. So to begin, start by just trying not to get my elbow in the way of the camera here, not bump my head into the camera like I do all the time. But yeah, the first thing I do is kind of bend the tabs here for the octals on pins 1 and 8, so I can just slide this resistor and feed it through like that. So I'll feed it through till there's just a little bit, maybe a 1/4 inch hanging off the edge there, between the resistor body and the pin number 8. And then I'll go ahead and give myself a little solder job. Solder on that, make sure everything's good. There we go. And I'll trim the excess off the other side of the resistor. And then what I'll do is I'll bend this around, right, to about like that, right? And then I'll trim a little bit off the leg here, give it a little turn, right, about like that. And then I'll insert it through to our ground lug and solder it down. Right, so there it is. Right, so that's the operation that you're going to do on all 4 tubes. Right, the next thing I'm going to kind of just, because obviously you don't, maybe you do, I don't know. You want to sit here all day watching me wire, because this, takes hours and hours and hours. So sometimes there's something interesting, sometimes not. So, we're going to, we're just going to do a little bit and then come back when a lot more is done. All right, so we're going to also do the primary of the output transformer. Right, so you have 3 leads, which consist of, your center tap and the 2 legs of the push-pull. Right, on a Marshall, the center tap is white, and the 2 legs are on this particular transformer as well as on, I think most vintage Marshall transformers, the brown and the red are the secondaries, or rather the legs on either side. So I'm going to start by winding them, right, and bring them about like that. It's pretty good, right? Nice and neat coming down, right? And then the way that there's a phase that you have to pay attention to right here, right? Which is basically how the feedback is going to, or the feedback, global feedback system is going to work inside the amplifier, okay? So this may be interesting to like maybe first time builders or people that are just curious. So you have a push-pull amplifier like a Marshall, and push-pull refers to the output stage being that there are two signals that are out of phase with each other, which are working in a sort of a push and a pull to deliver a singular signal through the output transformer, right? So you end up with one side switched on, one side switched, switch, and they're out of phase. Now, when you have a feedback loop, right, which is basically taking the output of the amplifier and feeding it back into the preamp, right, the purpose of which is to limit the excursion of the amplifier. It has a tendency to want to, if it's out of phase, it'll cancel, right, and it'll limit the excursion. It'll make it sound a little bit cleaner, a little bit tighter. If it's positive feedback, then you have what? You have a feedback loop, which is basically like sticking a microphone into a speaker, right? If you're using a PA system and you take your mic and stick it into the PA speaker that the mic is hooked up to, you have a positive feedback loop, and then it just wails, right? It goes into massive oscillation and just screams at you, right? So same thing with the amplifier. If you're in positive feedback, when you turn the amplifier on, it will oscillate and you'll get just this, you know, just incredibly loud wailing noise out of it, like wah! And that's because you wired it up wrong, right? So you got to pay attention because you want negative feedback, right? So you want the output of the amplifiers to be negative to the input of the phase inverter, and the phase inverter is obviously the same thing. It's two halves that are out of phase with one another. So you're feeding back into one side of the phase inverter, and you want it to be out of phase with that. So basically, you have to pay attention to which side of the push-pull you're wiring to which side of the tubes, and then to the output transformer itself will be connected correctly to the preamp, and you'll have negative feedback as opposed to positive feedback. So now that I've said all that, as we said, who cares? And we can go on, right? So on the Marshall, red is on this side. So we're going to go to pin 3, right? So let's see, we got 1, 2, 3. Pin 3 is right there, right? So we'll pay out a little bit there, and then we'll snip it, right? Or my wire strippers. Here they are. All right. And I will, examine, is this pre-tinned? Yes, it is. So we have some pre-tinned. Hayboer usually pre-tins everything, which I like. So we're going to put this down here, and at the same time, we're going to take some of the scrap lead that we just sort of reserved from trimming it down to size, right? And we're going to go ahead and we're going to also feed that through the same solder lug, right? Because we're going to bring this over to this octal socket, so they're going to run basically in parallel to one another, right? Because 2 on each side. Okay, so we got that, and then we just basically bring it around like that and towards the socket, measure it out about where it should be, trim it off, strip the lead, place it in, solder it home, and that is done right there. So that side of the push-pull is done. The next thing you're going to want to do is to run your screens, right? And screens are another element we won't go into of the tube construction, and we're going to basically, all the screens run in parallel to one another, right? So you're just basically going to run a lead all the way across from tube to tube to tube to tube, excuse me, on pin 6. Right, and that goes like so, or rather 7, 6. Okay. And we'll bring this over to here, right? And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put 2 in each time. The reason being is you're actually going to use, there's on the tube itself, there's 2 through holes in the solder lugs, right? So the bottom one I'll use for the wires, and the top I will use for the resistors, because we're going to put some wire wound resistors for the screen supplies, which will help the tube deal with life in a marsh lamp. I didn't tin this one, did I? Or did I? It's hard to see. So the camera actually picks up what I'm doing better if I don't have my lamp on, but I know you probably can't tell, but it's actually not that bright in here. It's actually kind of dark, but it's for the benefit of the camera right now, so I'm having trouble seeing. There we go. Right, and I'm just going to be doing this a little bit, and then we're going to have, you know, I'll turn the camera off and continue wiring so I can see you all when there's a little bit more wire done, right? So I'm going to get to here, right? And now I'll show you what you're going to do with the resistor. Right, so we'll leave these, we would continue on, I'll do that off camera. I'm going to go over now to installing some of the other resistors around the tube socket, right? So let me get a couple of things here. So we're going to get one of these. I'm just going through my box to grab what I need. Okay, so I've got 2 things out, right? We're going to have the grid resistor put on first, and then this screen resistor, right? So this is a 5-watt 1K, which is good for EL34s, and I've got a 5K resistor, which is good for almost everything else, except for like when you start to use like KT66s, you got to bump it up a little bit to like a 10K. Reason being is that the tube will oscillate if the grid of a KT66 is hit kind of hard. So GEC, which is, you know, the original KT66, in their tube data, they always suggest using like a minimum of a 10K grid stopper, what's called a grid stopper, and that helps, you know, limit the blast that the grid takes. So, all right, so I've got that right there done, right? And I'm going to do make a little pigtail for it. So I've got a little 16th inch drill bit, and I'm just going to kind of wrap it around the bit, right? Finish it up a little bit, crimp it down, and then we end up with a little pigtail here. Let me see if I can lift up the amp to show you, right? Let me get it orientated good. Can you see that? So that makes it really good to stick a wire through, right? So it becomes almost like a solder lug when you do it that way. So I'll run, you know, grid wires straight through from one to the next, and it makes things kind of neat. Next, we're going to put in these screen grids, right? So I kind of bend them in a little bit so they look a little bit like this, right? And then I'll go from the inside of the socket to the outside like this, right? And at the same time, I'm going to take this piece that we just tinned a second ago, because this is going to go up to the board, right? And I'm going to kind of get it ready and feed it through the top as well, right next to the screen resistor. And that'll attach to the circuit card that we had wired up to provide the power supply for the screens. Right, so there we go. So that's in place. So I'll bend this rest of the lead up in the air and trim it away. And on this one here, I'll kind of bend it up a little bit. And then I'll solder it in the other side. All right, snip it, bend it up, and there you have a nice ready to go tube socket, right? It has all the parts that we sort of need. Let me grab the board real quick and I'll kind of show you what's going on here. So the board will go in where is the standoff? Oh, the standoff's actually should go over there. I was wondering about that. All right, so I'm gonna have to move a standoff, but no big deal. But you see how this is the screen supply right here, and where the choke will attach as well. So we're gonna need to guesstimate the wire length to get there. So this is good right here. So I'll just trim that off, and then this will attach to our board, right? They must have a different way of doing this. Interesting. Anyway, all right, so let's see what else we need to show you about this. All right, so the two leftover lugs, right, which are 2 and 7, those are for the heaters. And that I'm going to do pretty much last, right? I'll run the heaters, well, probably before I do the panel. Right before I put on the panel, I think it'll be easier to do the heaters then. So we'll get to that. Let me finish up doing the rest of these sockets the way I've done this, and then we'll move on to the heaters. All right, I'll see you in a minute. All right, so we got the sockets pretty much all that we were talking about. Got those all wired up, right? So we have our plate connections, our screen connections, our grid connections. We have our cathode resistors in place. It all looks pretty good. Now I'm going to do some filament runs, right? So I'm going to run basically the octals, and then I'll leave the preamps for after we have the amp wired up pretty much all the way. So we could start with wiring the filament. So we have on this transformer a 6.3 center tapped section. So we have the green and 2 black, right? So green is your center tap, which will go to your chassis ground over in this area right here, and then the blacks will go to the sockets, right? So I'm going to start by basically winding these up, right? Twisting them. Okay. Now for this one, I'm going to do what amounts to a traditional kind of Marshall looking filament run, right? So I'm going to bend this down here, tuck it against the edge of the chassis, measure out a little bit of one lead right here, and then I'm going to cut that lead right there with my cutters. Okay, this is some very thick gauge wire here, so let's strip it. Okay, we're going to tin it. Okay. And we're going to try anyway to jam it through here, right? There we go. Got it through. And we'll just get it a little bit better of a joint there. There we go. And then I'm going to bend this one around the socket, right? Right around here somewhere looks good. Clip it off. Okay. Strip it. Tin it. All right. Now I'm going to tuck it underneath this 1 ohm resistor here. Keep everything nice and neat. Now I'm going to bend it around a little bit. Line it up with this socket here. Get it in place. I'm going to spin the chassis so I can get at. Is it still in frame? Yes, it is. Okay, I'm going to line it up. I'm going to go ahead and apply some heat. Get it through. That's good. Put the chassis back down. And I'm going to go ahead and tin that, or rather make the joint good. All right, there we go. All right, so now we have the first socket is ready to go. It has our filament lead on it, and now we're going to continue the connections down the line. So in traditional Marshall fashion, we're going to be using some of our 20 gauge top coat tin, black and red. So I'm going to twist them. I'm going to do this more like a fender because I do prefer that. I think I talked about that a little bit earlier, but I think it's a better system than the way that Marshall did it, which was kind of like wrap, 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 and then leads going around, wrap, 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 and tucking it down the corner. I like to keep them up in the air and have them equal length, and I think it looks really neat. So I'm going to wind all this lead, right? So I have a whole bunch of, you know, a little longer than the chassis here of wire, and I'm going to go ahead and chuck it into my drill here on one end, right? And then I'm there we go. Gonna have a bunch of twisted wire. All right, this will save some wear and tear on your elbows. I'll tell you that, and your wrists. All right. Okay, so now I'm gonna try to make everything look really neat. So I'm gonna grab my ruler, right, and I'm gonna measure. Right, so you've got 2.5, right, between each socket. So what I want to give myself is like, let's say 3 inches. All right, so 2.5, let's give it an inch more on each side, so 2 more inches, so to be 5.5, right? So each length I want to cut from socket to socket, I want to have 5.5 inches worth of wire. And that'll help everything look really consistent and neat, right? Because your brain will see things that look very similar. So I'm going to go 5.5, right? And just cut it here. And I'm going to need 1, 2, 3 of them, right? So I'm going to cut off 3 of these at the same length. Just make sure that they are the same length. There we go. And we'll save the rest for, well, actually, how long is this? Because we'll pay out that too. So that's 2.5. Yeah, so we'll make 1 more. We'll have 1 more of these. Reminds me of licorice. Okay, so there's our lengths of wire. And now what I'm going to do basically is I'm going to bend out the edges here on either side, right? Like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and strip each one. Remember too, when you're stripping wire, you never want to touch the actual core of the wire, right? That would be bad, as they say in Ghostbusters. All right, so I'm going from the inside out, right? So it looks nice and neat. So I'm gonna splay these out a little bit more. Like I said, it's dark in here. It's really a pain in the butt that this camera does not like light. It gets really grainy. I got to get some new cameras. Every time I get another camera, it's worse than the one before. Anyway, I should probably just get like a new iPhone. Those cameras are supposedly pretty good. All right, so that is soldered in there nice. And then you want to keep the same connections, right? So 2 to 2, 7 to 7, right? So you don't want to end up, you know, just haphazardly kind of wiring up your filaments. That would just not be on. We don't allow that, right? So I'm going again from the inside. I'm going to go to the lower set, right? Each one of these sockets has the solder lug, and on each pin, and each solder lug has 2 through holes. So I'm going to use the bottom through hole first, solder in there, right? This one kind of escaped, which happens from time to time. It's very hard to see. I keep saying that, I know, but it is. Okay. Just does not want to stay. There we go. Okay, so there's this one. Now you're going to do this same thing. Grab another section, right, and kind of splay out the ends. Strip your wire. Right, remember though too, with like 3 Monkeys solderless stuff, there's no wire stripping, which is really good, because if you nick your wires, you got problems later. I guarantee it. Problems, big problems. So unless you're stripping wires all day long, all the time, you're not going to do it very well. All right, so we're in the top through hole now with this next lead. Right, again, paying attention to the orientation, color for color. Right, we don't want to mismatch. There we go. Okay, and then basically I'm just going to continue this down the line, and I'm going to leave this last one just hanging. Well, just as I was complaining about my camera, it decided to vomit. Right, and do a card failure. So we missed a couple of seconds of wiring. I know you guys are probably very upset about that. You didn't see me wire that. Those 2 leads. It's a shame. You don't know what you missed. It went like nothing ever happened before. It was awesome. All right, so this is the last one that I'll do right now, right? Which will be just hanging up in the air. All right, so into place. Okay, there we go. Right, so this one we're going to leave up in the air, and then we'll connect it once we wire out the preamp. So this will be like the last thing to complete before we're done. So I'm just going to try to neaten this up a little bit. Right, and there we have it. There we have it. So this is sort of where we're at right now. What I'm going to do from this point forward is it's time to start putting on the panels. Right? So just getting some of the things out of the way that I don't want to have. interference with. Okay, there we go. Now, we'll do the back panel first. So let me go grab that and some parts. So we have our back panel here, the plexi panel, right? And we're going to have to add a hole for the presence control as well. But we're going to install this as we need to start, you know, wiring up the power supply. So I usually hang the panel to start off with. I'll grab one of the cliff jacks here and insert it into the chassis, and then sort of put the nut on, and now the panel's sort of where you want it, right? But you can still move it around a little bit. So let me see if I can tilt it up a little bit so you can see that. We're going to put it like that. Okay, so you can see you can kind of still move it around a little bit and get everything where it needs to be. The next thing I'm going to put in is I did modify the mains input to use a screw-in, right, type IEC connector, which I prefer than a clip-in. You know, it's going to go on tour, and there's going to be a lot of, you know, a lot of use unplugging, plugging, plugging, unplugging. So we want to have something that there's a lot of customer interaction with, as we like to call it, to be very solid and secure. So I prefer these. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, you know, I drilled those holes through the plexi and through the chassis to accept some number 4 stainless screws. And I'm going to be using the number 4 stainless lock nuts as well to give a really good secure connection. Because we don't want the IEC connector pulling out of the chassis. That would be embarrassing for everybody, right? So the reason why I'm not putting everything in before and tightening everything down before this is because, you know, this needs to line up, right, with the holes that I've already pre-drilled. So if I put all these in, maybe, maybe not, it'll line up again. So I'm going to tilt this chassis back up again, and I'm going to grab my number 4 screw driver, Phillips head, and I'm going to grab my nut driver number 4. Right, so here we go. I'm going to just start them a little bit. I'm going to drop the screw on the floor. There we go. Grab the nut, put it on. Now we could just go ahead and drive it home. All right. Here we go. All right, so that's nice and secure. That is not going to come out. So now we can put in the rest of the parts here, right? Or we don't actually need to yet, but we can put them in just to make sure that everything is going to fit nice and neatly, right? Because we're probably going to want to pull these back out again when we bring the transformer, the output transformer secondary, which is over here, down and across to where the selector switch is going to go. But I'm just making sure everything fits nice before we proceed. We grab over here, I've got more parts. I got my fuse holder, and I've got the switch for the output selector. So I got these fuse holders, which seem pretty cool, right? But they're using the smaller fuses, which I think is more popular these days. Easier to find, so we're going with these guys. All right, so I'm gonna get that in there. You use a nut driver probably to tighten it down, or rather a socket. I'm not sure what socket it is. That is, I think it should be a 17, maybe. Yeah, 17 mil. Okay. Uh-oh, something's happening. It's very dramatic. Dun, 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 dun. Can also use a wrench for here. Let me find my 17 wrench. It may actually be somewhere else. I do believe it is. So I've got one of these, and these are kind of cool. It's an ESP guitar tool, right? And it has two sides. One side is an on, one side's an off. It has a little toothed edge on one side, opposite on the other, to allow you to grip basically any size nut. It's smooth on the bottom and rounded, so you can use this. This is basically built for like putting pots on guitars, or especially like the toggle switch on a Les Paul, and you're not going to scratch anything. So these are really cool. You can also use them for amp work, right? Like right there. So I'm going to go ahead and just tighten these guys down. Okay. That one's already tight. Now we're going to grab, because the 17 wouldn't fit on there, right? Well, it's always a question, like when you're building stuff, of what problems you want to accept and what problems you want to eliminate. So do you want to have a lot of interference with your soldering because this is in the way, or do you want the soldering that you've done to be in the way of putting this on? To me, this is one operation versus like 6. So I'll go that second. Did that make any sense? I doubt it. All right, so that looks like some kind of a switch there. Then we got some hardware to go along with it. All right, get the hardware out of the bag. Toss this stuff in the garbage, as we say back home, the garbage. What do you got over there? I got a lot of garbage. All right. So I'm guessing like this is probably how it's going to go. Well, we need it to line up with the selector, right? So we're going to get the middle position. All right, it's 3 position for your output impedance, 4, 8, or 16. So we get the middle position, and then when we put the knob on, it should correspond on the panel to the middle, which would be 8. It does have this indexing pin or tab on there, but we don't need that because we don't have an indexing hole in the chassis. So we're going to find our pliers here, and we're just going to take it and we're going to fold it, right? Get it out of the way. That's good. We'll put our lock nut on, right, or our lock washer, and now we'll insert said, that's interesting. Really? Hopefully. We're going to have to see how this orientates, because we do not want contact, obviously, between the selector switch and the socket. Some of those points on that socket got a lot of voltage on them. Some other things don't respond very well to lots of voltage. Be careful what you shoot at. Not everything here responds well to bullets. Trebek. Alright. Let me find a selector switch thingy. This is the thingy. This is the knob. So obviously it's got to go this way, right? Oh God. Okay. Yeah, I think we got enough room in there. It's not going to create a disaster. All right, so let me get my socket set. Let's look at that and let's guesstimate what that's going to be. That looks like it's going to be the 5/8, or rather 9/16 is what I meant to say. And it is. I don't know how I know these things. It's like I look at stuff and I can tell what it is. It's a talent that has absolutely zero application. All right, so we put the switch on, right, and that will back it out a little bit. Yeah, it's better. Had it too close. I like to hear the click. All right, so we're good right there. Let's take a quick look with our Sherlock Holmes here and see how much space we got. I think if we bend this tab up a little bit like that, I don't think we're in any danger of contacting anything here. But if I were to, let's say, design this again, I might not want it to be in this particular orientation. You know what? We're not going to do that. Let's take it back off. So we have to do a mod. I just think it's too close. It's too close. It could cause a disaster potentially, right? So we're going to have to just mod this a little bit. These are some of the challenges sometimes you end up with, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to get the switch into a position where we feel it's safe, right? Where there's no chance of stuff contacting anything, right? So that's pretty good right there. Let's see. Okay. Now we'll go ahead and tighten it again. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a file and I'm going to flatten a little spot here on the very top of it so that it can register. So back to the toolkit. You know what? I need to get a file from the main toolbox. I shall return. All right, so I ran down and grabbed my file, my smooth mill bastard file. I like saying bastard file. And I'm going to file a flat spot on this shaft. It's made of brass, so it's pretty easy to file. And to protect the panel, I'm going to kind of hang my fingers over the edge to act as like bumper stops. Right? I'm just going to go ahead and file a flat spot on the very bottom of this chassis, perpendicular to the chassis itself. I mean, on this shaft, perpendicular to the chassis. So I think that's good. We got a nice, that cuts really quick. Got ourselves a nice flat spot onto which the set screw of the switch can register. Right, so we'll put it on, tighten it down. Nice. All right, so we have everything where we want it, and no dangers of any kind of, let's say, illegal contact. I don't think there was going to be any, but you know what? I'm paranoid. So that's what we done did. All right, so the back panel is now on. Now we should put on the front panel. So I'm going to take out these leads, which I have a habit of shoving through the potentiometer holes to kind of keep them out of my way, because they just annoy me. All right, and now we're going to put on the front panel. So let's grab that. So here is the front panel, plexi. I'm going to peel off the protective film so we can scratch the crap out of it while we're building stuff. Just have to be careful, right? And then you won't scratch the crap out of it. But if you leave it on, then it's a pain in the ass for your customer. There we go. I don't know if anybody's got a peeling fetish, but there you go. So again, I'm going to hang it, right? So I'm going to grab a cliff jack, right? And I'm going to grab some switches. Right, here's the cliff jack, and here are those switches that we had gotten, and they got nuts. Okay, so I'm going to start on the cliff jack side of the chassis. Let me get this frame a little bit better. There we go. Let me turn off the light. I know it's harder for me to work, but the camera looks a little bit better that way. So I'm going to go and use this top connection, right? Place it there, line it up, get the nut through. It's too dark to see. There we go. All right, so now it's hung on this side, right? And then we have one of these Carling switches that we're going to use for both power and standby. They have a sort of a hex nut on the inside, and then on the outside they got this finish nut. All right, and the finish nut has a little knurling on it to make it look nice and pretty. So we're going to hang the other side over here. All right, and what we do is we just put the, to make it look nice, we put the finishing washer on until it just goes and exposes like a half a thread, and then we tighten it from the inside. All right, there we go. It's tightened from the inside. Now, I made this specifically for doing this job. So I got a piece of stock of steel and just ground with the wheel a section there and shaped it a little bit and then put a bend in it, right? So it can kind of sneak behind the pot like that, right? Because a big wrench won't fit behind there and then you can't tighten things, right? So this thing I made a long time ago and it works great. So I bet they sell a wrench that's thin like this. You know, who knows? It probably comes with, they might even have one that comes with some cheap furniture because they're not going to give you a good wrench. So we got our switches and we're going to put those in, right? And then we'll also put in our indicator lamp, which will indicate when it's on. There we go. That looks good there. And then we tighten from the inside once again. Nice. Now let me grab the indicator lamp. So here's our little neon, and we got a yellow one, which I like. Let's check the voltage on it. Yep, it is 125 volt. That's good. So let's bring it through. You could probably do some of this filter cap wiring before you insert this guy. That may be a good idea. Let's see how much problem it is. Nah, ain't a big deal. Ain't quite lining up right yet. So maybe we have to loosen these guys again so we can get it to fit. All right, so let's take this out. All right, loosen this guy up a little bit. Right, and then we can put this through, make sure it goes through. Right, and then we can snug that in a little bit. See that this, all right, that still passes through. So we can send this one home again. So a lot of times with these panels, you know, there's a little bit of play in them. All right, so you want to kind of make sure that all your holes are lining up before everything gets too far along. So that's good there. Tighten this back down again. Now we can go ahead and put the indicator lamp through. Voila. And then we can put on the lock washer and nut. Right, and then I'll just use my pliers to kind of tighten it. You don't want to use a wrench really on plastic threads. It's hard to tell when you've gone too far and stripped them or broke them. So pliers you really can't get a good grip on the nut with, so it generally slips off before you can over tighten it. All right, so we have all that stuff, and then we can just grab a potentiometer just real quick to confirm that everything else is where it should be, that we can pass through all of these potentiometer holes. Yeah. Yep. 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 Okay. We're good there. So it looks like our panel is in the right place. So now we can, I guess, begin to wire. What are we doing on time? We're making these videos kind of long. So maybe now is a good time to stop. I think we've done a lot today. As a recap, right? We wired up all the octal sockets with the screen supplies, screen resistors, grid resistors. We wired in the primary side of the output transformer to the sockets and jumped them to their respective tubes. We've done our heater line all the way to the preamp sockets. We've installed our back panels. We've modified our output selector switch. We've installed our fuse holders, our IC connector, our front panel, our jacks, our lamp, rather our switches and our lamp. So I think this is a good place to stop. So again, we're going to continue this build, but I want to do it in piecemeal for you. So we'll end this video here. I'm going to keep going and recording, but I won't post until, you know, you guys have chewed on this for a little bit. So once again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.